Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 29th chapter in the book of Proverbs. We made it all the way up until the 14th verse. It's a chapter of 27 verses. This is going to be the shorter half, but we're going to briefly review the predominant theme of that which we already covered, which pertains to rulership. There are 5 verses which speak of rulership. And to rule means you set the law, you make the rules, you control people. Verse 2, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice, but when a wicked one rules, the people sigh. So whether a benevolent king is on the throne or a tyrant sits there, there's going to be the dichotomy of reactions and perceptions is going to be righteous will cause people to rejoice because that means justice will be established, where tyrants are capricious and wicked and arbitrary and whims and selfish, and this is a source of sadness for the people. Verse 4, a king establishes a land by justice, but one who receives bribes throws it down. Bribes corrupt justice by bribing a judge away of punishment or seeking their favor through financial gifts, and this to allow or introduce or to condone or tolerate or admit the practice of bribes in one's king is a recipe for ruin and disaster and destruction for a king. A king must rule his land by justice. That means justice unperverted, uncorrupted by the presence and evil influence of bribes. Verse 12, if a ruler listens to lying words, all his servants become wicked. So much revolves around the ruler or the king, and so much revolves around his advisors, and they do affect the people. So if a ruler surrounds himself with dishonest advisors, flatterers, deceivers, manipulators, sycophants, then all his servants, every one, will become wicked because he will be deceived, misled, and led astray by lies. Verse 13, the poor man and the oppressor have this in common. Yahweh gives light to the eyes of both. So even though the oppressor puts himself above and exalts himself at the expense of the poor and the lowly, there is a democracy of his creation. He is both a product of the same common creator. Yahweh gave life and light and sight and everything else and experience to both the poor and those who oppress them. They are both his creations. They both bear his creative mark and fingerprint. The king who rightly rules the poor with truth, his throne is established forever. Now, the existence of the poor is not a realistic aim of any society, but they can be given justice and treated fairly, and that is the temptation. So the poor are a fact of life. We will have them with us always, and kings who rule justly and righteously and benevolently, he will establish a throne that lasts forever if he treats the least and the vulnerable and the last among him worthy and befittingly, and with as much justice and equality as the rich and the aristocrat. Verse 15, this marks the lesson itself. A rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child unrestrained brings shames to his mother. So wisdom is not natural. It cannot come by osmosis or praxis. It has to be instilled by discipline and diligence and study and training. And so a rod and reproof, a rod is a physical instrument which is used to physically discipline a child by striking him on the back or the bottom, and reproof is just discipline, but these are both sources of wisdom. So even though postmoderns like to scoff at the notion of striking a child physically, it does instill in them wisdom. It beats the stupidity out of them. Because a child left to his own devices, if he's not disciplined, a child is not going to become wise without wise parenting, without proper instruction, without loving family, education, and example, and they will bring shame to the mother, and the mother truly has no one to blame but herself for failing to discipline her and the father. When the wicked become many, transgression increase, but the righteous look on their fall. This is a fact of life. When the wicked multiply, when they become the majority, that means sin becomes more commonplace and just a course of life and the daily reality and the way of the world. Because wicked people multiply by procreation and influence, cultural influence. They corrupt righteous people into wickedness. But the righteous, the one who remain true to their integrity, the ones who wish to remain righteous, will look on their fall. They will see their certain self-destruction, because wickedness by its very nature is self-destructed. It spells its own ruin, because wickedness cannot last or sustain itself on any durable or permanent foundation. Discipline your son, and he brings you rest and delight in your life. So the purpose and positive benefit of disciplining your son is that he's going to take care of you in old age, and he's going to be a delight to you from start to finish, from birth, from the cradle to the grave, from the womb to the tomb. If you discipline yourself, he will bring you rest. If you don't discipline your son, he will bring you trouble and commotion and chaos and a dissatisfaction and disharmony and restlessness and anxiety and fear and dread. These are the opposites of rest. These are the consequences of failing to intervene disciplinarily. If you want him to be a delight and a source of pleasure and joy and pride in your life, throughout your life, you have to discipline your son while there is still hope, because the consequences of neglecting to discipline, the earliest years are the most formative. So if you don't make the most of those years, you're setting him up for a life of failure. Where there is no vision, the people are let loose, but blessed is he who guards the law. Now, a vision is absolutely essential for a nation, an organization, a church. A church must have a vision of what it wants to see, what it has to have a vision, something it can visibly imagine, if not see, but work towards it. And without a vision, a church is just gonna, become stuck in rote and routine and fall into the same trap and same boring, and nothing exciting can happen in the absence of a vision, and people will be let loose without a vision to unite them and guide them. They will go their own way, they will go their own thing. The fragile unity will fracture if man is let loose to his own devices. But the Torah, the law of Moses, the Pentateuch is a source of blessing if you keep it. It is alternately a source of cursings if you disobey it, if you treat it trivially and neglect it and just treat it like garbage, then it's going to work curses in your life. But it is a source of blessing if you keep it. And keeping it is challenging, but it is worth it. A servant is not disciplined by words. Though he understands, he does not respond. Now, this is not all servants. This is a servant. So this is a type of servant through whom words does not register. Words do not have the effect of disciplining him and educating him and learning him and correcting him. He may understand, grasp intellectually, but it's going to go in one ear and out the other. He's going to behavior, your words are not going to affect his behavior. So for such a one, you have to use more than words, force if necessary, because we want him to if we understand something intellectually, we are without excuse for living and abiding by the truth. The problem and the challenge is that the truth is uncomfortable and it is often unpleasant. And sometimes it is more easier and expedient to live the lie, but the truth is what gives life meaning and everything else meaning. Have you seen a man hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than him. So think before you say. So many people say before they think, and they are hasty in their speech. They speak too fast. They do not calculate their words or script. They just say whatever comes to their mind, and they do not discipline or calculate or count the cost of the consequences of what they might say and how it might be received. They just want to make themselves known. They are guided by impulse, often irrational, and impulsive impulse that just speaks for the sake of being heard and not for any other benefit. It is a selfish exercise, and there is more hope for a fool. So a fool who holds his tongue and keeps silent is better off than one who is hasty in his words, one who speaks without thinking. A fool is going to be, you're better off being fool, provided that you are silent. Granted that hastiness of words is a mark of foolishness, but not all fools are hasty with words, though all people who are hasty with words are pretty much fools. Even the wise are sometimes hasty with words and say things they regret without thinking. But that does not, one foolish action does not merit or qualify one as a foolish person or character. A single action does not define one's character. He who deals tenderly with his servant from youth has him as a son in the end. So servants lived their entire life. They mutually coexisted with their master, and as such, there was often, not always necessarily, bonds of affection and friendship and love and loyalty which existed in an ideal master-servant relationship. And such a one, can be treated as a son, especially if a master doesn't have a son, then his servant will be a surrogate son, and the absence of son leads to many surrogate sons, such as we witness Timothy perform that role and function for Paul. A man of displeasure stirs up strife, and a master of rage has many a transgression. These are self-evident statements, the causes and effects, the natural and expected and inarguable cause of effect, that one who is displeasure, one who is not happy, one who is angry, he will stir up strife and commotion and unnecessary conflict and violence because misery enjoys company, as the adage goes. That's why miserable and depressed people like to create chaos and commotion wherever they go. And a master of rage, now that means that rage is their master. That does not mean that they have mastered rage. Rage is their master. It controls them. It defines them. It tells them what to do. It defines their thinking. They are not the master of their rage. Their rage is the master of them. And he has many sins. Anger is a wellspring and a source of many, many sins. It is a sin, a gateway sin, which leads unto every sin. And Paul writes in Ephesians, "Let not the sun go down on your wrath." So anger is natural. It's unavoidable, but it is to have no permanent place in the Christian life. The pride of a man brings him low, but the humble in spirit obtains esteem. So this is the paradoxical formula, which has a parallel in the New Testament, Matthew 23:12, Luke 14:11, and 18:14. He who humbles himself shall exalt himself, and the vice versa. He who exalts himself shall be abased. And here we witness the opposite presentation. The pride of man brings him low, so pride inflates and lifts up and exalts one. But it ultimately debases a man and humiliates him and brings him low, because pride is to have an exaggerated estimation of oneself, which can only bring humiliation to you. But humility is an internal trait that the pride have to be humility. There are two types of people who can be brought to the earth. The humble, these are the internal, it comes natural to them, and the pride, who are humiliated. Humble and humility emanate from the same etymological word in Latin, which means ground. So a humble person has that internal and elusive quality of humility, and he obtains esteem, so he is exalted because he is voluntarily low. He who humbles himself shall be exalted. He who shares with a thief hates his own life. He hears an oath but does not report. So shares with a thief just means befriends a thief and shares things and goes about thieving with him. And thievery means you hate your own life. You do not value your life if you are sinning, because the wages and consequences of sin is death, and thievery and stealing leads nowhere good, and you will disdain an oath and not honor it and not report it. This is the consequences. So seldom does one man break one sin. There is usually a chain reaction, and as we read in James 2:10, he who violates one of these laws violates the whole thing. So each thing can be thought of as a layer in a ladder, and if one of them is removed, the ladder is no good. The fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts in Yahweh is made high. So why fear man who can injure the body but not do any damage on the soul? And this brings a snare. There is no reason or rationality to fear man. Some men, to fear men in general. Now some situations and in extreme circumstances makes it all right to fear men, but if fear of men is your default state of mind, if you fear rejection of men, if you fear a man coming at your throat with a knife, that's one thing. But if you fear a man for rejecting you, that is a cowardly fear, and there's to be no place, and that brings a snare. So if you fear someone because of something he might say or might do that you imagine that might bring injury or offense to you, that is a snare that is preventing you from reaching out to that man and possibly making a friend. And if you trust in Yahweh, you will be esteemed, you will be exalted, you will be made high, you will be lifted up. So trusting in Yahweh, the challenge is often that our lack of knowledge, our ignorance, often supersedes our trust in Yahweh, and we have to have our priorities straight and in order to make the most of our relationship with Him. 27th and final verse. An unrighteous man is an abomination to the righteous, and he who is straight in the way is an abomination to the wicked. So abomination is the lowest term of derision and designation. It is the term of the utmost and utter contempt. And so an unrighteous man, the righteous askew, and we do not, I don't want to say hate the sinner, because we should ideally hate no one, but we should certainly hate the sin. Their lifestyle and their actions and their choices should be an abomination to us, a term of derision. And the same dichotomy exists, the same parallel is alive and intact on the other end of the spectrum. He who is straight in the way, he who walks the covenantal path or the straight and narrow path to salvation, is an abomination and an offense to the wicked. And oftentimes, if we are suffering persecution, it is a sign not that we are doing wrong, because that we are doing right. 2 Timothy 3:12, expect persecution for all those who live righteously. So these are the things we have to deal with. Sin distorts our perception, and it gets our perception and understanding of things all mixed up, and it distorts our values. So we can see with this in mind how people like us could be an abomination to people we rightly and righteously regard as abominations. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.